Welcome back to Shades of Blue. My name is Willie Daniels, and we are continuing our episodes with Mr. Victor Glover to tell about his experiences on board the International Space Station and what it took for him to become the astronaut and individual that he is today. What was that experience like, being up there for 6 months on orbit? Because, I understand when most of the astronauts go up for the first time, and like with a lot of the space shuttle astronauts, and a lot of people, they think that you're in a weightless environment and you're flying around in zero G and everything. And they don't realize that the astronauts are in a free fall motion the entire time that they're up there, and they're falling around the Earth constantly. Yes. And what was that feeling like after 6 months up there on orbit?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. So when you first get to space, you notice you're floating, you're weightless, and it's interesting. I don't think a lot of people really dig into the physics of why we float in space, what weightlessness means. So we're going so fast around the Earth. Orbit is 7,000 meters per second or 17,500 miles per hour at the altitudes that we were at. And so we are falling, at the speed of gravity, 32 feet per second or 9.81 meters per second squared. And so we would eventually hit the ground, but we're going so fast that the curvature of the Earth and the rate that we're falling are the same. So we roughly stay in that same orbit. Every now and then we have to do a little bit of a boost to climb back up. We stay between 250 to 260 miles or 400 kilometers up. And so it means that everything around you is falling at the same rate. And therefore, if both things are falling, you relative to the ground near you, you're floating. You stay in the middle of the module if you're in the middle. And so that creates the sensation of weightlessness. And what's really interesting is you don't feel like you're falling. At least I didn't. When I first got there, weightlessness felt great. I never felt any nausea or any motion sickness, which was awesome. And then once you're in the spacecraft, it's much smaller, a very tight quarters. When we got into the very large space station, again, that can incite some motion sickness. But I was very fortunate not to experience any of that. And then I got into the space station, and you're in such a big volume. It's almost like being in a house after being in a car for a full day. It took us 27 hours to get to the space station due to orbital mechanics and where we launched and when and where the space station was. And so once we got inside the space station, you really don't feel the sensation of falling because everything around you is stationary. So your eyes really take over, and what you feel in your inner ear and in your gut, it just, your body is definitely out of sorts. And so, but I felt like I was definitely a science experiment. I really enjoyed the fact that like my 44 years of life up to that point was in 1G, where you had the floor, the ceiling, this was up, this was down. And now I could spin in any orientation and open my eyes, and it all felt the same. And that was really amazing. I slept in the overhead. My room, crew quarters we call them, was in the overhead or the ceiling. And so every day and night, the beginning of my day, I saw the space station upside down. And at the end of the day, I saw the space station upside down. And I really enjoyed that. Being in weightlessness for an extended period of time. I was up there for 168 days, 167 on ISS, and that was just a really amazing experience. Mm-hmm. It's hard to describe what living in weightlessness is like because there's nothing on Earth like that experience. And so I tell people the best way that I could describe it is that it's like living a dream about flying. That's the closest thing I could relate it to is to dreaming. There's no experience on Earth. It's not like ice skating. It's not like floating in a pool or even our neutral buoyancy lab training where we're underwater in the suits that float. It is a very unique experience, and I loved and appreciated every day of it.
Now, traveling is 17,500 miles an hour. In other words, you're watching the sunrise every 45 minutes. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's a sunrise or set about 45 minutes, and so we go around the world 16 times a day, and wow. So that means we get 16 sunrises and sunsets a day. So roughly, sun rises, 45 minutes later it sets, 45 minutes later it rises, and that is one of the things I did the most in space was to go into the cupola, which is a big set of windows where we take all those amazing pictures. And I would go into the cupola and just stare out the window at sunrise and sunset, not directly because it's the sun and it's not being filtered by the atmosphere like we see it down here. It is the sun full strength through the vacuum of space, and it's very bright and you get very warm. But to see the horizon light up with the blue and the red, and then to see the sky get bright and the space station get bright and the earth go from dark to light, it's just such a powerful experience. Every time I saw it, it felt really special.
For a young person to hear something like that, that's a total inspiration for them to say, hey, I want to be like Victor and go up in space as well, because I want to see that very same thing, even for an old guy like me. And I'm thinking when you went up on Expedition 64, and you had an opportunity to go up with your crew on Expedition 64 and then meet a lot of those innovators that created the Dragon, and like Elon Musk and so forth. And now when you look at it, you have Jeff Bezos, and I think last week they just recently launched a mission with Michael Strahan and Laura Shepard, who was the daughter of Alan Shepard.
Yes.
And most people probably, especially the young people, will say, well, who is Alan Shepard? And most people don't realize that Alan Shepard was the very first astronaut to go up in space. And it wasn't in a circular orbit around Earth. It was a parabolic arc where they shot him up into space, and he was up there for 8 or 10 minutes and then came back down. And having astronauts like Alan Shepard go up, and now we're looking at the advent of space tourism, and you have Richard Branson and we look back at the pioneers of the early 60s. And one of the gentlemen that both you and I know and that I want to highlight today is Mr. Ed Dwight Jr., who back in the early 60s, he was hand-selected by President John F. Kennedy to become the first Black astronaut to go up in space. And I had an opportunity to speak with Ed here recently, and I said, Ed, what would it be like to go up in space? And one of the things that he says, that would be a culmination of my entire life. Yes. And so one of the things I would like to do, and I'll even mention it here, is see if we can maybe get Ed Dwight up on a mission, perhaps on one of the Jeff Bezos missions, like William Shatner here recently. And I watched William Shatner after he came back from his flight up into the low Earth orbit and came back, and he was almost in tears with joy of the experience that he had. And talking with Ed, he said that would pretty much complete my life. So what are your thoughts about that?
So, that's a lot. You've opened the can of a lot of things. And I think that this is an interesting time and a great time. My boss said it. We announced last week that we have hired 10 new astronaut candidates, and the UAE has 2 new candidates, and we're going to start them training just after the new year. But in that announcement, he said, this is the golden age of human spaceflight. And whatever you want to label it, this is a very unique and amazing time. Never before have we operated so many spacecraft, and next year there is the potential to double the type of spacecraft, the type of rockets that launch out of Kennedy Space Center. Since we went from 1 to 2 different types, I don't think we've ever doubled the kinds of spacecraft we launched from Kennedy Space Center in 1 year, or the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. So it's an amazing time. And, all of these efforts by our partners, and as well as these independent companies that are working for the tourism, the suborbital flights, like the parabolic flight, like Al Shepard you were talking about, I think it's amazing. I think they need to just continue to push safety and make sure that they're doing things right and learning the lessons of human spaceflight. But I think what they're doing is incredibly inspirational and incredibly important. And, people often ask me, what do you think about them being called astronauts? And, I really don't try to get bogged down in that, because that's not really the question. The question I think is important is it inspirational? And is that inspiration affecting the decisions of young people to go out and study science and engineering and mathematics and to push themselves to be the best them that they can be? And I think the answer is yes. Richard Branson, for example, started that effort for Virgin Galactic to create this system to safely take people to a suborbital, apogee and back to Earth, landing safely. He started that effort 20 years ago. So for 20 years, there have been great aerospace jobs out there for people to help make this a reality. And same for Blue Origin and other companies like that. And I think about some of the folks like one of the test pilots that helped to test the Virgin Galactic spaceship went to Cal Poly, the same university that I went to the same time that I was there. His name is Mike Alsbury. They had an accident in 2014 on Halloween, and the spaceship broke apart, and one of the pilots was killed and one survived and was injured. And so Mike Alsbury, he lost his life in that and left behind a wife and children. And so right now, if you go to Kennedy Space Center, we have a memorial for astronauts who have given their life in the quest of human space exploration. And his name is on that mural. It's called the Space Mirror. It's a big black stone, very highly polished item that reflects the sky in the background as you stand in front of it. The reason I bring it up is because when people ask me whether or not someone should be called an astronaut or not, Mike Alsbury did not make it to the 50-mile or 62-mile point that we talk about where, reaching this line. And he definitely did not make it to orbit, meaning, you can spend several hours to days or months in space like I was able to. But you know what? He opened the door for this current reality of Virgin Mothership and Virgin Spaceship to take people to space, to the edge of space safely and bring them back. And I'm glad to see that we've honored him and his legacy and his family by putting his name up there. So, but that may be a little bit of a sad story, but that's also a very important part of it. And why I say, as long as they're doing it safely, this is a great time for human space exploration and this new budding thing called human space tourism. Space tourism is great because it can encourage young people to dream big and to go to school and study things that are going to help us to reach those next, big things, the moonshots, right? In the 60s and 70s, we did something as humans by putting our best together and being able to do something that will, for generations, inspire people. When we do something great nowadays, it's called a moonshot. And so now our generation has a chance to do our own moonshots and to create our own cultural perspective for doing great things together. So I am super excited. And to see Alan Shepard, the first American to launch into space, to see his daughter go to space was amazing. I watched that launch that morning, and it seemed like a fantastic mission, and I applaud them. And it's very amazing. In fact, that crew will be the last crew to physically get astronaut wings from the FAA. The FAA will award them astronaut wings. And I found out in that same press release, the FAA is going to also award astronaut wings to Michael Alsbury. So I was very encouraged by that.
This episode does continue. Make sure that you check it out.